Hi, we're here with Kathi Kearney, who is from Maine and is a longtime gifted advocate and educator, and she also has a specialty in homeschooling. And so today's topic with Kathi is homeschooling. So thank you, Kathi, for joining us. As we were talking before we started rolling the camera, we were talking about that homeschooling has changed a lot in the last 40 years.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Could you talk a little bit about what some of those changes are?
Well, 40 years ago, there were a number of states where it wasn't even legal.
Okay.
Now it's legal in every state. Every state has its own homeschool rules and laws. So it's not the same from state to state, but it is legal in every state. 40 years ago, not even Christian publishers would sell materials to homeschoolers, and public schools were very reluctant to loan any materials or textbooks, and the whole thing was, if you're going to homeschool, you're totally on your own. And people were, because there weren't very many homeschool organizations out there, and it's totally different now. Every state has at least one homeschool organization that's secular and another one that's Christian. They may have several different kinds of organizations. Every state has homeschool support groups, and a lot of states have homeschool co-ops that have just kind of generated organically. There's online courses now that didn't exist 40 years ago, and the whole thing has just kind of shifted. It's gone from maybe 40,000 homeschoolers nationwide 40 years ago, and that would be that's a large estimate, to about between 1 and 3% of the school-age population today. So it's a big shift.
Yes.
There's a lot more.
Yes. So in the gifted world, as a parent, I often talk with other parents about the right educational setting for their child, and often it's difficult for a parent to decide, first of all, what type of educational setting is appropriate in the school setting. What are some of the factors parents should consider if they are entertaining the idea of homeschooling? What are they seeing in their child? What do they need to be aware of related to their family?
A lot of parents of gifted kids, a lot of families that homeschool decide to homeschool from the get-go. And so they're planning for it from the time their kids are little. But parents with gifted kids often end up homeschooling when everything goes wrong at school. So they start their homeschooling kind of in the middle of a crisis. And I think that's the thing that's a little bit different, because they have to come up to speed very quickly. And it's probably not something that they had planned to do. So that's an issue. It's often a case of there's no gifted program at the school, or the child needs acceleration and the school is totally not in favor of that and isn't going to allow it, and the child becomes more and more unhappy, and there can be some depression involved, and then the family is kind of in a crisis situation. Parents need to, it's not every case, of course, but I do see that a lot. And parents do need to think through, can we really do this? Does it fit with our family situation? Do I have a good enough relationship with the child to be able to guide the learning as well as everything else? Because it is adding another piece to the parenting. It does cost some money, but not as much as you would think. A lot of people feel like it's going to cost so much for textbooks and materials and online courses, but it's actually pretty amazing what's out there of very high quality for free that's appropriate for gifted kids. So I don't think that should be a limiting factor for people. Somebody has to have a flexible enough schedule, especially with a little kid, so that you can either stay home with them for part of the time, or tag team with the other spouse, or have a flexible enough workplace or work situation that you can take the child there. I know one mom, for instance, who was a lawyer in private practice, and she just set up a little schoolroom in her law office.
Well, and I think for myself as a parent, where I would feel intimidated is, do I have the skills or the knowledge to keep up with my gifted child? So let's talk a little bit
Yeah.
about what that means
Let's talk
for
about that.
homeschooling a gifted child.
Yeah. Well, first of all, having been a gifted ed teacher for a very, very long time, I can tell you there's a whole lot of times in the public school where I'm saying, how can I keep up with this kid? And the key really is to be a very good facilitator. I am not particularly a science person. And I had a student who, as a fourth grader, wanted to write a book for kids about quantum mechanics.
Wow, wonderful.
So I said, why not? I don't know that much about it, but he actually now has a published book about it.
Wow.
So just because you don't know everything yourself doesn't mean that you don't know how to be a good facilitator and go out and find those things. And in a homeschooling setting, you can connect with other parents who may have different areas of expertise and trade-offs in tutoring. You can use online resources in areas that are not your thing. You can follow a kid's passions and interests. That doesn't happen very often today in American schools. And if there's one thing that we know about gifted kids, they have passionate interests that they really want to follow, and they get told to wait a lot. Wait till you're older, wait till the next grade, wait till you go to high school, wait till you go to college. And one of the things about homeschooling is you can build the work of the child and those passionate areas for them right into the homeschool program.
Well, and I would also assume there's really no ceiling in terms of where you can take your child. If
Correct.
your child is interested and accelerated, you can continue that.
Correct.
Is there any fear or danger in getting too far ahead? I think parents sometimes worry about that.
No, not really, because it's very difficult to hold a motivated kid back. And it's the holding them back in traditional schools, public and private, that can, for some kids, be very, very frustrating. The only thing that I would say is, I have a friend whose child went through a regular education program but skipped 4 grades, and she would call me up and say, Kathy, another grade just evaporated. But when you're in a homeschooling situation, you're not necessarily cognizant of what grade the kid is in, because they're often in several different levels at a time. The only thing that I would say is be aware that if the child is moving very quickly, college could come up sooner than you expect.
Good point.
And it used to be, back when I first started working with families with gifted kids that were homeschooling, going to college early meant sending your 9-year-old to a college campus. And it's not really like that anymore. It can be, if that's what's appropriate for the kid, but it can also be doing online college courses as part of your homeschool program until the child is older and wants to go away and live on a college campus.
So let's talk about socialization for a minute,
Oh,
because
the good old what about socialization question.
well, several of parents that I know who homeschooled often are concerned, is there a point that they should, one, would homeschooling detour them from making friends and becoming socialized, if you will? And second, then, is there a point in time where they would want to matriculate them back into the school system?
That happens a lot.
And is that an issue in terms of
Yep.
coming back in? So,
Well, I think the what about socialization question was a lot bigger 40 years ago when there were so few kids that were homeschooling. At one point in Maine, 40 years ago, I knew all 10 kids who were homeschooled, and there were 10 in the whole state. And then it just started to grow and grow and grow. And now there are so many homeschoolers that you can find all kinds of activities. For instance, in Massachusetts, there's an organization called Voyagers, and they've been around for a long time, at least 20, 25 years, and they run classes and social activities for homeschoolers. Most of them at that particular site are gifted homeschoolers. So it's much different than it was 40 years ago just because of the numbers have grown. So you just have to connect with a local homeschool organization or a local homeschool co-op or a local homeschool parent group to find out where the others are. Homeschoolers hang out at the library a lot, so that's a good place to start.
So do you encourage people to just go online and search homeschooling my state? Or
yeah.
What are some of the areas that you could direct people to for resources or
well, like
how
I said,
to connect
every
locally?
state has at least 2 statewide homeschool groups, I believe. And any of those groups, even if you are not Christian, the Christian homeschool groups have all the legal stuff down as far as what you need to do to homeschool in your state. And they even often offer workshops like how to start homeschooling workshops. So your information about the legal stuff, exactly how to do it, is going to be there. There are so many homeschool groups across the country, even in rural areas, there are homeschool groups.
And I've heard of co-ops where parents would take turns on given days of the week or on certain subject matters. And
I know some kids who homeschool, and 4 days of the week they're doing homeschool co-op classes.
I've also heard that, for example, in my son's high school, he has a friend who was homeschooled pretty much through his sophomore year. And then junior and senior year, they approached the school and asked if the student could come in and do special activities, athletics, that kind of thing. So I guess my question is, do you see that parents need to kind of think out of the box and not be afraid to approach their school and ask if their child can participate?
It's the Homeschool Public School Access Law. It's actually a law, and it spells out what the schools are responsible for doing, what the parents and the student are responsible for doing, and allows them to take as many courses as they want and to participate in extracurricular activities at the school. There are a number of states that do have a law like that.
And what about standardized testing? Do homeschoolers have to, at some point, take a standardized test so that when it comes time to prove that they've mastered 8th grade or mastered senior, 12th grade, that they can prove to the state that...
Yep, it depends on what state you live in. There are some states that require a standardized test at certain grade levels. There are other states that don't require anything. There's some states that are kind of in the middle. My state is kind of in the middle. You can either have a standardized test, or you can have a review and acceptance of the child's progress by a certified teacher, or you can have a portfolio review with a review group that includes at least one certified teacher in it. So some states have options like that.
And can you just type in on a search engine the laws relating to homeschooling in your state, and it will come up in terms of on the state education website? Or
every state education website does have information. As far as I know, Homeschool Legal Defense Association also has state-by-state information. When you look on the State Department of Education websites, sometimes they're not totally correct. We have a situation right now in my state where some things are not correct as far as how to register to homeschool, and they're outside of what the law requires, and I would know because I wrote Maine's homeschool law my very own self. But it's pretty easy to find that information.
So what would be your main message to parents in terms of considering homeschooling, feeling confident that they can provide this type of experience for their child, and that it is a viable education option for their student and family?
It's really helpful if there are 2 parents in the family, in an intact family. It's really helpful if both spouses agree that this is a good idea. It's really hard if one spouse is very opposed and the other spouse really wants to do it. And in that case, I would say adults work this out between yourselves first. And then you're going to need to figure out what approach you want to use to homeschool.
What do you mean by that?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to homeschool. You can make it look like the public school at your very own kitchen table. Or you could go in the totally opposite direction and do a very child-centered, child-directed, free-flowing kind of an unschooling approach, or anything in the middle. There are at least a dozen different approaches that seem to have emerged out of the modern homeschool movement that you can read about on various websites and so forth. But for gifted kids, you're going to have to think this through pretty carefully. You're going to have to understand, just like the public school should have understood, if you're taking them out because they weren't letting them go fast enough, they're going to blow through curriculum. So what you thought you had budgeted for curriculum, that kid might have gone through in a month or two. Or you might have bought the wrong curriculum. And it might be going at a pace that's too slow, or it might be not creative enough, and you're going to have to rethink things. And I encourage parents to rethink things. If you've got something that doesn't work for you, get rid of it and find something that does. You can sell it on eBay.
Good point. Well, it sounds like the parents really need to know their child.
Yes, that's
right?
very, very important.
In terms of their strengths, their interests, the pace that they learn, and anticipate that. And similarly, you said if something isn't working, try something else.
Yes. You don't have to wait and go through a bazillion meetings at the school to try something else. If you've got something that really isn't working when you're homeschooling, you can stop using it today and use something else tomorrow.
Well, and I actually provide that advice to parents in general, where education, when you're working with a gifted child, is really a year-by-year experience.
Yes.
Day by day,
It
week
is.
by week, year by year. But in the end, just because we're pursuing one education programming option in a given year does not mean you can't switch it up and do something else. I've seen parents flow in and out of homeschooling, where the kids will go to public school for a while, and then at a certain point in time, perhaps entering middle school, if they're not being challenged enough, they might take them out for a couple years. One family I know went on a year-long adventure around the world.
That happens too.
And they basically did all their learning on the road. Right? How exciting would that be? So again, it's not a permanent situation at any point in time.
No, because
it's another option.
The public school always has to take your child back. So if it's really not working, you can say, okay, we're done.
And our children change and evolve
and
over
kids
time.
change and they need different things.
Right.
I had a friend who homeschooled. She's the kid who got me into this. And they homeschooled through the elementary up through about age 9. And she wanted to take courses at the college. And it turned out that this particular branch of the university had a rule that they would not discriminate on the basis of age. They were thinking about 80-year-old grandmas. They weren't thinking about 8-year-old little girls that wanted to take college French.
Right.
So she ended up doing that for a while and using part of a curriculum I developed for her for a while at home. And then she decided she wanted to go to college full-time.
Wow.
So the only way to do that was to apply for homeschooling, but it really wasn't because she was taking courses at the college. And her mom had always said, if you ever get to be 11 or 12 and you feel like you just need to go be a middle school kid, just let me know and I'll let you do it. And she did.
That's wonderful.
So she was really just following what the child needed at the time. And when she needed homeschooling, they did a beautiful job homeschooling. When she needed to do early college, she did that. When she needed to go back for a year and be a middle school kid in a typical public middle school, she let her do that.
Well, I think that's great advice for our parents. And thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Okay.
Appreciate all the work that you do for gifted children and homeschoolers and all of your other areas of expertise and interest. We're here with Kathi Kearney from Maine. Thank you.